So, we are left with 3 specs to analyze. We have Survival Hunter, we have Fire Mage, and we have Arcane Mage. Now, they are here for different reasons, all 3 of them, but they have been left for last because I judge them to be the worst when it comes to design currently, one way or the other. We will see soon why. There have been other specs that I considered putting here, so I'm here for the honorable mentions. First honorable mention goes to Windwalker Monk. Windwalker Monk, the only reason why it's not here is because the base of the spec is working. Yeah, I know, I'm surprised too. It's actually not too bad to not be working, the problem is all the rest. They still have their mobility, their utility, and their base rotation. However, the amount of buffs and broken interactions they have, and lack of ability to spend chi, spend combo points, in massive amounts and constantly being stuck to overflow resources and being unable to consume them is a major problem. The fact that it's not here doesn't mean it's all roses ahead for Windwalker. The other honorable mention is Feral Druid. Feral Druid, and the only reason why I'm saying Feral Druid and not Assassination Rogue is because Assassination Rogue has all the things Feral wish it had. It has an immunity, it has Shroud, it has a cheat death, whereas Feral's got fuck all, and it has the same problems. Too long of a ramp up and too much damage locked behind DOTs and overtime damage that gets abused by other specs in Mythic Plus and doesn't make it as strong. Another honorable mention has to go to Frostmage, and the only reason why Frostmage is in here is because I didn't want to be too mean and stuck all mages in here. So let's move on to the first of the specs. So it's Fire Mage. This is funny if you're playing BFA right now, because you would be wondering how can Fire Mage possibly be here? Well, you weren't there in Uldir or BOD, you don't remember? The entire problem of the spec really, and why it is here, is because Fire Mage only became a build and a spec viable in BFA once they got Hyperthread wrist wraps in Mechagon and they got Memory of Lucid Dreams. This allowed them to give enough resets of their Fire Blast and enough guaranteed crits to keep up a massive combustion window. And I guess the help from the Ajaro Trinket as well. That's essentially the band-aid of the expansion. People right now are too focused on the strength of Fire Mage in the end of BFA, so they expect it to be similar, but that's the entire problem. They were like that because of borrowed powers that now they don't have anymore. The closest thing that will be able to happen is if you will be able to pair properly the Tanking Legendary and the Firestorm Legendary. You can randomly proc Firestorm to give you basically 5-6 GCDs of guaranteed hot streaks back to back to back, which is in turn going to allow you to use your Sunking Hardcast Power Blast to trigger 6 seconds of combustion, and then after that you can use your own combustion. This is going to give you 21 second long combustion. That's basically it. Fire Mage is really locked into getting some massive help from borrowed powers to get their build going, because as it is, you simply cannot guarantee enough crits with just 2 or 3 charges of Fire Blast. You need outside help. So Fire Mage right now in BFA has, of course, extremely strong, out of control, broken burst. Single target, AoE, cleave, it doesn't matter. Ignite does it all. It does everything for you. You don't need to do anything. Ignite is going to work passively to just kill out of control. Great mobility, great survivability, and cheese with cheat that mechanic of Ice Block. They have also great execute DPS thanks to Scorch, guaranteed crit on execute targets. Minor problems with spread cleave, since Ignite that doesn't reach that far away when you want to spread cleave, but beyond that they are basically unstoppable. Now, I'm sure all of you are older than 2 years old, and most of you have played the start of BFA or the mid of BFA, and you remember the problems of Fire Mage then. And they are the same problems now, which is the reason why Fire Mage is here. Fire Mage is the least bad of the specs left here, and it's only here because of the crippling problems when it comes to scaling. If you've watched the previous videos, I have mentioned multiple specs that have problems scaling and will be much weaker at the start of the expansion than they will be later on. Haste-starved specs, like for example Arms and Fury Warrior, are, for example, more indicative of a more slow and crippled rotation at the start compared to when they are going to scale. And Fire Mage is the same. When you enter the expansion and you will be at, pre-raid level and you will barely reach 30% crit, as a Fire Mage, when you have a passive that already gives you 15% crit and you only get to 30, and your entire rotation is built around crits, it's, you know, it's a problem. It's gonna be a problem. It's gonna be frustrating. There is not much you can do behind having to wait for gear, which is why it makes it so miserable. The changes to Fire Mage are similar to all the other mages. Mirror Image is baseline, and you get Focus Magic as your talent throw ability. You get Phoenix Flames removed from your talent throw because it becomes baseline, and now Ignite no longer spreads automatically, but instead you have to use Phoenix Flames to spread it to 8 target max. Now this is good because it gives you agency. It is probably going to give you less damage because you're not going to get it passively. It's only going to spread to 8 targets. Phoenix Flames has a cooldown, but it's going to give you agency. It's going to give you the ability to create a massive ignite on a single target and then spread it when you want. There is still the problem that Phoenix Flames has a travel time, so you might lose some of that ignite damage because of it, but it's not that bad. So, problems. When it comes to Covenants, Fire Mage is similar to Frost Mage. Mirrors of Torment is an absolute joke of a Covenant because it basically doesn't work in PvE. You have to wait for cast times of the enemy target, which is terrible. Deathborn is a decent cooldown for Fire, as opposed to being useless for Frost. Still not as good as Arcane. Shifting Power is, again, not as strong. Effectively, as a Fire Mage, yes, you're about cooldowns, but effectively you only have one. Combustion and nothing else. And then you have Radiant Spark, which is again the more all-rounded, versatile, low cooldown ability that most mages will probably want to go for at the start. When it comes to legendaries, you have some good options, especially for the options later on, like Feathered Incantation. At the start of the expansion, this is a joke and a completely useless legendary, but later on, this is going to be able to scale you and your crit pretty high in some combustion windows. Molten Skyfall is similar to the free cast of Frozen Orb for Frost Mage on Fireball casts. This is a free cast of Meteor on Fireball casts. Firestorm is another pretty helpful ability. It is also helpful as a pre-use on your combustion. You can proc this to give you essentially 5 seconds of combustion before you actually combust. And then you have Sun King's Blessing, which is another possible extension of combustion. 6 hot streaks grant you a 6 seconds of combustion when you hard cast your Pyroblast. Hard casting Pyroblast with this is also going to be able to help you or give you an extra incentive in being talented into Pyroclasm. Now, on to the problems. I have tried both versions. I have tried the pack single target ignite and spread it with Phoenix Flames, or use your hot streak for the instant flame strike and AoE that way instead of spreading the ignite on a single target, and either way it's just clunky at the start. It will just feel miserable. And there are still other problems. Your AoE talent throw is still entirely based on AoE. It doesn't give you anything on single target, which doesn't feel very good. Flame On is still a joke of a talent throw because Flame On is insane. You will never be able to move away from Flame On right now. An extra charge of Fire Blast, especially when your crit is so low, you absolutely need an extra charge of Fire Blast. Not to mention, when it comes to raids, Searing Touch is also going to be a must because of your lack of crit. You will want guaranteed crit on execute phases. Absolutely. Rune of Power, again, another guaranteed forced talent for Fire, especially since it's autocast on your combustion usage, so you are also rather locked in talents and not much choice is there for you. So overall, the reason why Fire Mage ended here is because it's really starved of gear compared to other specs, and it will just feel miserable. Although, unlike the other two specs, I do think Fire Mage will be able to grow out of it and be just a normal functioning, well-functioning spec later on. Hopefully not as the disgusting abomination it became by the end of BFA. How did it get to this point, Hunter Bros? I still remember. I still dream of Black Arrow. I dream of Explosive Shot. And then I wake up and I remember that this is the current version of Survival Hunter. It is just so depressing. Survival Hunter has gone from BFA to Shadowlands essentially being one of the least played spec in the game in essentially all content. They did have very high single target DPS and sustained damage, not gated too much by cooldowns, not gated too much by target swapping. However, that's not their problem. That's not why they are in this video. The changes to Hunter Hunter is one of the specs that has received 0 changes to their talent tree. Not even minor changes. It's like they forgot the talent tree of survival and it's the same, which is bizarre. The unpruning is hilarious for survival, because they now have in their spellbook Steady Shot and Arcane Shot, which they can't even use because they don't use a ranged weapon. So that already tells you how functional this spec is. They have problems with their talent rows, where Mungus Bite and Wildfire Infusion are essentially mandatory. Without Mungus Bite and Wildfire Infusion, it's the worst base rotation spec I've ever seen. It even loses to Demon Hunter and Red Paladin. It's just shocking. And even then, Demon Hunter and especially Red Paladin have some talents that can change the way you play, but for survival, it's rather dull. You have to go for Bloodseeker to gain 10% attack speed for every bleeding enemy. When you go for Wildfire Infusion, you gain Shrapnel Bomb, which can be used to spread a bleed with your cleave, which makes Bloodseeker very strong in AoE. You can get 50-60% attack speed. When you go for Volatile Bomb, you gain extra damage whenever you can spread Serpent Sting and then use Volatile Bomb for extra AoE. So Mungus Bite and Wildfire Infusion by this point should have probably been made baseline already. When it comes to Covenant, Wild Spirits is terrible because you do more damage the more GCDs you use, and Survival Hunter is not a GCD capped spec. You don't have one spell to use every GCD, so you cannot maximize the damage of this Covenant ability. Blade Shot is terrible because you do not have any extra synergy with Kill Shot. You're not a Marksmanship Hunter, so this is poor. Death Chakram is strong just because it's overtuned and does a lot of damage for all Hunter specs, and Resonating Arrow is just a flat 30% crit, which is, fine. It's just good scaling potential with crit chance on a 1-minute cooldown. When it comes to Legendaries, Wildfire Cluster is free extra AoE on your Wildfire Bomb. Latent Poison Injectors is an extra single target burst while stacking your Serpent Sting on the target. Rala Stalker is an extra chance to gain Wildfire Bomb charges with your Raptor Strike, and Butcher's Bone Fragment is a stacking damage on your carve when you use Raptor Strike. None of this significantly changes your rotation or changes the way you play. The problems are still the same. Anything that isn't single target becomes very annoying to play. It's very unsatisfying, and the damage isn't that high, but that's not the problem. I always point this out. You don't have that many damage options for AoE. You have to hope on your bomb, random procs. You have to get a physical damage bomb, the shrapnel bomb, to spread your bleed, to get massive attack speed, and then maybe a poison bomb as you're spreading poison with Viper Sting. You gain extra AoE, maybe take the AoE bomb legendary, but it just doesn't feel as good. At the end of the day, you only have 4 buttons. You have your kill command for focus generation, you have your Mungus Bite to dump your focus, and then you have your bomb and your Viper Sting. It just doesn't feel good. You also don't have in general an identity as a spec. You don't have utility. You don't give buffs to your raid. Even your mobility is crippled compared to your fellow ranged hunters. So to me, it just feels like a forgotten spec. I just feel like Blizzard maybe wanted to change it, or maybe knows they have problems, but they just couldn't figure them out for this expansion and they just let it be. The absolute 0 changes to the talent tree to me is the biggest indicator. Considering the amount of extremely strong or stronger picks in the talent tree, from Bloodseeker to Mungus Bite to Wildfire Infusion to Guerrilla Tactics still being there and unchanged, it just feels bad. It feels bad. I am hopeless about Survival Hunter. And lastly, we're gonna finish with Arcane Mage. Funnily enough, Arcane Mage is the mage spec that has received the most changes when it comes to talents, mostly because it was the one that had the most problems when it came to talents. Charged Up has been cooked into Touch of the Magi. Now Touch of the Magi gives you 4 Arcane charges when you cast it, and it's now baseline. So you're gaining 2 talents baseline at the cost of 1. They are replaced by Arcane Echo to give you splash damage on your Touch of the Magi target, as well as Enlightened. Arcane Orb is moved in place of Touch of the Magi in the level 45 row, and Enlightened is being moved into the last row, and Nether Tempest and Supernova have been swapped around. Main biggest changes of Arcane, behind the baseline stuff like Alter Time and Mirror Image being baseline for all mages, is that Arcane Barrage now gains the Legion legendary effect that gives you 2% of your max mana per Arcane charge spent. This is particularly strong, not because of your mana as a resource, as an Arcane Mage, but also because it devalues a lot one of the talents that you always took before, which was Rule of Threes, to give you mana discounts. This opens up for Amplification. Amplification gives you 2 extra missile charges when you cast Arcane Missiles during Clear Cast. This is particularly strong because Clear Casting has been massively buffed in Shadowlands. Clear casting now also gives you an extra Arcane missile when you cast it during clear cast, and clear cast can now stack up to 2 times. So this is a buff that compounds on multiple effects, which is very good. Archan Power has been buffed. It was previously nerfed because it gained 50% more duration, but the cooldown was doubled from 90 seconds to 3 minutes. But now the cooldown has been brought back to 2 minutes. So now it's an overall net buff. The other biggest change to trying to put Arcane back on track is the fact that your Mastery Savant no longer limited to increasing the damage of Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage. Now also increases all your Arcane damage done. This is going to increase your Arcane Explosion, your Arcane Missiles, your Touch of the Magi, and all of that, which is very, very good for scaling. Now, what were the problems? Arcane Mage had very strong single target, very strong burst, single target. But what they did lack was cleave, what they did lack was AoE. What about their covenants? Do they do anything? No. We already talked about this. Mirrors of Torment is just for PvP, doesn't really work in PvE. Shifting Power gives you too much downtime to use, but to be fair, Arcane is the spec that could benefit from it the most. When it comes to cooldown reduction, you can get about 12 seconds of cooldown reduction every 45. Radiant Spark remains the most well-rounded source of sustained damage over its 30-second cooldown. And lastly, Deathborn. Arcane is the more serious contender for mage specs that can use Deathborn, especially due to the lack of cleave, proper cleave by Arcane Mage. They can get it with Deathborn. Now, onto the problems. The problems are similar to the Unholy Decay. They have massive amounts of setup required. It's not a setup in terms of DOTs, like Assassination or Feral. It's not a setup in the terms of Demonology when it comes to pet summoning. It's a setup in terms of buffs and GCDs. You want to cast 4 Arcane Blasts, you want to cast Mirror Image, you want to cast your Covenant ability, you want to cast Rune of Power or Arcane Power to insta-cast a free Rune of Power, and then Touch of the Magi, and then start blasting. That's like 7 GCDs, it's like 10 seconds of cast time. It's really clunky, it's really slow. There should be a way to speed this up, and nothing has been done. Similar to Unholy Death Knight, you still have a very clunky opener, which is going to hurt you, especially in Mythic Plus. The other problem is cleave. Yes, Arcane Barrage can hit multiple targets based on your Arcane charges, but that's all you have. You can also take the Necrolord Covenant to give you cleave, but beyond that, your Arcane Blast has no way to hit multiple targets, your Arcane Missiles has no way to hit multiple targets, and currently, Touch of the Magi is very undertuned. The effect in and of itself is good, but the splash damage has been nerfed. The splash damage was low already, and it has been nerfed by 50%, so it's even lower. And the new talent introduced in Shadowlands to increase your AoE away from Arcane Explosion, but to do AoE with your single target, Arcane Echo, just doesn't do enough. The scaling is terrible, and you just don't hit enough times to make this pulsating damage AoE be worth. So you still have problems in AoE situations. You will be currently still forced to spam Arcane Explosion if you want to do any serious AoE, and you also have, and I'm not even gonna go over the mobility, you have the same tools of a Fire Mage and a Frost Mage. The problem is your instant abilities are much less spammable than they are for Fire Mage and Frost Mage. This makes you way more vulnerable to sudden movement required and loss of DPS. And God forbid you have to move during your burst window. So overall, Arcane Mage is in this place because not much has changed from BFA, and they were very clunky in BFA. I commend Blizzard trying to change things up. Some things have really helped and will really help. The mana regen on Arcane Barrage, trying to gain a more Arcane Missile-centric rotation, thanks to the buff to clear casting and being able to use Amplification. When it comes to Legendaries, you can go for Arcane Bombardment, which is Execute. It is very, very strong for single target, and it's going to compound on one of the strengths of Arcane that it already has. You have Siphon Storm, which is, guess what, an extra cooldown you can get. You can get about 12% intellect for 30 seconds whenever you evocate, which is super strong if you can manage to be without evocation after your burst window. And then you have Arcane Infinity, which is again extra damage to Arcane Missiles, which can push you towards a possible Arcane Missile build and a more Arcane Missile-centric build, which would also be very good when it comes to helping you and your problem with movement. And lastly, Temporal Warp, which allows you to use multiple instances of Bloodlust at reduced effectiveness. Overall, Arcane is just here because of the multiple problems it has that have not been really fixed, although it has received some changes, and I do believe it's going to improve. Similar to Fire Mage, they are not in the same black hole that Survival is. They have a chance to crawl out of this class identity problem the more gear they have, but for now it feels pretty clunky and also annoying in certain situations, specifically AoE and Cleave. And with this we are done overviewing all of the DPS in the game with these last 3 specs. After this, I will be making a few videos about the damage profile of all the specs and how they compare to each other. Again, numbers tuning is much more difficult to gauge at this stage, but it's more about when I mentioned specific specs being very strong in single target compared to other specs being very strong in AoE, other specs being very strong in cleave. How do they compare to each other, specifically when it comes to raids and when it comes to Mythic Plus? What does one spec bring more than the next? What does one spec bring more than the other when it comes to their strengths? Like if I say Assassination is very strong in single target and Arcane Mage is very strong in single target, what exactly is the difference? Why would you want to bring one over the other? Etc, etc. And in closing, guys, you should just play what you enjoy. Don't get too worried about what I said about a spec being too bad or being too undertuned. If you enjoyed it before, and I'm telling you it's gonna be roughly the same coming into Shadowlands, then you shouldn't be too worried. You're likely going to enjoy it anyways. So beware always of clickbait videos, pulling out numbers that don't exist right now, telling you DPS numbers that aren't there right now, and play what you think is enjoyable. See you guys soon.